settle this mano a mano.
What is going on, guys? It's Rova from Gamenest, and intro skit aside, today we'll be taking a serious look at Resident Evil 6, the good, the bad, and why it is regarded as possibly the worst entry in the coveted Resident Evil franchise. No time to waste, let's get straight into it. Resident Evil 6 was proposed shortly after the successful release of 2009's Resident Evil 5 and entered full development later on that year. In March 2009, Masashika Kawata stated that the new title would take Capcom 4 to 8 years to develop, but in reality it would take just about 3 years, which can be seen in the final product of the game. The development was led by Hiroyuki Kobayashi. He and Capcom both stated that the game was meant to deliver an approach to evolve the series. The game had a huge development team which consisted of over 600 developers, as compared to the original Resident Evil, which Shinji Mikami worked on by himself for 6 months before having a small development team join him. This is also Capcom's biggest development to date, even at the beginning of 2021. Resident Evil 6 was due to release on the 20th of November 2012, was pushed forward more than a month to the 2nd of October, which was partially due to multiple copies being stolen and sold in Poland. The game had since had a port to PS4 and Xbox One with graphical enhancements on the 29th of March 2016, and it was released on Nintendo Switch on October 29, 2019. As of the 11th of January 2021, RE6 has sold 11,231,400 copies and has grossed $670 million, making it Capcom's fourth most successful game following RE5, Street Fighter 2 and Monster Hunter World. Personally, the story in RE6 for me is a bit of a bad aspect of the game. Certain parts of it are good, certain parts of it are bad, which we will cover later in the video. But the plot consists of 4 main characters, those being Leon Scott Kennedy, yes, that Leon Kennedy, Chris Redfield of boulder punching fame.
The following Thursday.
Listen, sweetheart. You're here to pour drinks and look pretty. So how about you shut your mouth?
Series newcomer Jake Mueller, who is the son of Albert Wesker, and Ada Wong. Each of these characters have a partner due to the game carrying over the co-op gameplay from Resident Evil 5, which is arguably one of the better features of the game. Leon has Helena, a government agent just out of the academy. Chris has a rookie, Piers, and Jake has Sherry Birkin. No, not that Sherry, this Sherry. And Ada has Agent, but we don't talk about Agent. So now, unfortunately, it is time to look at the terrible, terrible plot of this game. The main date you want to start with is 24th of December 2012, or Christmas Eve. And Jake Mueller, who, as mentioned, is the son of big tentacle boy bioterrorist Albert Wesker, flees local authorities during a bioterrorist attack in the Eastern European nation of Edonia. He partners with Sherry Birkin, who now works for the US government, who would have guessed, who has orders to extract Jake from the country as he has antibodies that could create a vaccine for the latest virus extravaganza, the C virus. On the way to the rendezvous, Jake and Sherry bump into the new mutations of the C virus known as the Juavo, who are now members of Jake's old unit, and the BSAA are there as well, and they're shooting at Jake and Sherry because Jake's still wearing the same outfits as his comrades that are now infected. Unfortunately, it's not zombies, that's in Leon's campaign. Along the way, they bump into these, as well as the tyrant-like enemy of the game, which, to be fair, I don't mind Ustanak, but he's too much like Nemesis for me. They tried to do Nemesis in RE6 and it just doesn't work. Anyway, he chases after them for a little bit until they reach the rendezvous point, where they meet up with Chris and Piers. Oh, and just in case you sadistic people didn't know what Usanat looks like, I'm going to roll a clip for you. Enjoy.
Later, in the void.
There's always something with women!
Meanwhile, the BSAA, yes, that BSAA, but unfortunately, no Trevor Alamo this time, have a strike team led by Chris Redfield and Piers Nivens deployed to combat the infected local population who have mutated into Juavo due to the C virus. This may be in poor taste, but it's 2021. The C in C virus does not stand for either coronavirus or COVID, just to make that clear. Along the way, the two parties meet, that being Sherry and Jake, as well as Chris and Piers. They meet at the extraction point for Sherry and Jake, and but before they can extract, these giant BOWs decide to turn up, and they are they're quite something. They're quite ugly boys. But before any of this can happen, Chris and Sherry have a little conversation before Piers and Jake decide to have a little spat like teenagers. Like, no, really, like that actually happens. Roll the clip.
Sherry Birkin, you were in Raccoon City.
How do you know that?
Claire,
Wait, are you Chris?
my sisters told me all about you.
Chris, the man is a wanted insurgent.
Yes, he's a mercenary, but right now he's under the protection of the US government. He's no threat to the BSAA.
Unless someone pays me to be.
What did you just say?
What?
Nothing.
HQ to Alpha Team. Reinforcements are unable to land due to anti-aircraft artillery. Take them out.
Alpha Team, copy.
We're picking up a large bogey on radar. It's heading right for you.
We'll talk later. Right now, you need to find cover.
After this encounter with the Ograman, Chris's team are attacked by the leader of Neo Umbrella's research department, who refers to herself as Ada Wong, but is not actually Ada Wong. Yes, much confusion. Anyway, she kills the entire strike team, barring Chris and Piers, using a device that infects them all with the C virus. Chris goes into a self-imposed exile, as he is affiliated with post-traumatic amnesia. Meanwhile, at the same time, Sherry and Jake's BSAA extraction is sabotaged by Usinak, who can now hang from helicopters apparently and jump between them. They are eventually captured by not really Ada and transported to Weiying in China before being held captive for 6 months until June 2013. We all remember Leon Kennedy, don't we? On June the 29th, 2013, President Adam Benford attempts to reveal the truth behind the 1998 Raccoon incident and the government's dealing with Umbrella to end further bioterrorist activity, which is a nice callback considering the game is such a far departure from traditional RE. However, the venue in the American town of Tall Oaks is hit by another attack which infects the president, which then leads to Leon and his partner Helena having to kill him. Later on, the pair encounter the real Ada Wong. No, not that one. This one. They learn that National Security Advisor Derek Simmons, who is a new character to the series, is affiliated with Neo Umbrella and was responsible for the attacks. Leon and Helena fake their deaths before pursuing Simmons to Lanxing, where also happens to be where Sherry and Jake are also being held captive. After about 6 months of wandering around being an alcoholic and no doubt punching more boulders, Chris returns to duty within the BSAA with Piers and a new team made up of members such as Marco. Arriving in a besieged Lanxing, Chris recovers from his amnesia and seeks revenge against Ada, which results in casualties to his squad along the way. Chris and Piers confront Ada until Leon intervenes. Now, completely off script, but I feel like I have to address this. This scene between Leon, Chris, Piers and Helena is completely fan service on the behalf of Chris and Leon. They've never even been as so much in the same game, let alone in the same scene up until this point, at least in the games anyway. And then after Resident Evil 6 came out, about 4 years later came Resident Evil Vendetta, which then partnered them up again. I don't think he's going to be in Resident Evil 8, but that's a whole topic for like a different video. After being informed by Leon, Chris and Piers pursue Ada to an aircraft carrier, destroying cruise missiles laden with the C-virus. Leon, Helena, Sherry and Jake confront Simmons over his involvement with the outbreaks, but not before fighting Ustinak again, but as a quad this time. Sherry covertly hands Jake's medical data to Leon in case of their captivity. Leon and Helena corner Simmons, who has been infected by Joavo, where he confesses to having killed the president to maintain the US's national security. The two see off a mutated Simmons, while Sherry and Jake are captured again, attempting to leave the city, and they are transported to an underground oil platform. Leon and Helena are warned by Chris that a missile has been launched, but that they are too late to stop it. Leon discloses Jake's real identity to Chris, and Chris has to rescue Jake and Sherry off of a remote oil platform. With Ada's assistance, Leon and Helena kill Simmons, but not before he mutates into a giant bee. Yes. Really. On that oil platform, Chris and Piers head underground, freeing Jake and Sherry from captivity before preventing a large-scale attack by a giant bioweapon known as Chaos. And this boy is even uglier than the Ograman that we talked about earlier. Unfortunately, filler character, Piers, gets badly injured during the encounter, heavily wounded, and in a desperate attempt to save Chris, Piers injects himself with the C-virus to help him turn the tide of the battle. He and Chris defeat Chaos before evacuating. Aware that the mutation will worsen, Piers sacrifices himself by pushing Chris to an escape pod, using his abilities to destroy the base. Meanwhile, Jake and Sherry escape the facility and kill Utanak as they ride a rocket-powered lift to the surface. The imposter Ada was simply a scientist named Carla Radamez, who was forced to transform into Ada by Derek Simmons. The real Ada was aiding Leon and Sherry whilst run the Neo Umbrella lab in Lanshan. Although presumed dead after being shot by one of Simmons' soldiers, Carla attempts a final attack against Ada, after having injected herself with a powerful dose of the C-virus, which she is killed. After aiding Leon and Helena in their battle with Simmons, Ada destroys the lab where her clone was developed and accepts a new assignment. Leon and Helena are both cleared for duty after the affair with the President. Chris remains with the BSAA and then Neo Umbrella, as we see in Resident Evil 7, and is command of a new squad, overcoming his guilt. Sherry continues her duty as a DSO agent, and Jake starts a new life fighting BOWs in an underdeveloped country with identities covered up by the BSAA. It is absolutely no secret that the majority of the RE fanbase didn't take that fondly to RE6 back in late 2012, but what did the critics say? For this I took the score for the previous main series entry and the following main series entry, that being RE5 and RE7 respectively, and compared the scores to RE6 for each reviewer. The reviewers are IGN, Push Square, Metacritic, and Eurogamer. Back in mid-2009, when YouTube was still in the dark ages, IGN gave Resident Evil 5 a 9 out of 10. 3 years later, in 2012, they gave RE6 a 7.9 out of 10. And 5 years after that, they gave RE7 a 7.7 out of 10, actually ranking it lower than RE6 and RE5. Push Square reviewed both the remastered versions of RE5 and RE6, giving RE6 a 3 out of 10, RE5 a 6 out of 10, and RE7 an 8 out of 10. So it seems to be that not a lot of people like Resident Evil 6, except from IGN, who seem to rank it higher than Resident Evil 7, which to me makes absolutely no sense. But the next reviewer would be Metacritic. RE5 on Metacritic sits at a respectable 69%, RE6 sits at a below average 60, and RE7 sits at an above average 86. Eurogamer reviewed the remastered versions of RE5 and RE6 and gave RE5 a 7 out of 10, RE6 a 6 out of 10, and RE7 a 9 out of 10, which are fair reviews in my opinion, I think that RE6 is definitely the worst out of RE5, RE6, and RE7, with RE7 being the best and RE5 being the middle ground. But hey ho, that is simply my opinion. The first time I played RE6 was about a year after it came out in November 2013. I was a little bit younger at the time, and I played through classic RE games like RE1, 2, 3, Code Veronica, and then the more action-oriented games like 4 and 5, and then I played 6 and I absolutely hated it. It was too much action for me, it was too action-focused, and it just was too far away from Resident Evil for me to actually enjoy. I finished campaigns and everything like that, but then I left it. Then I came back to it to make this video, and I was platinuming every Resident Evil game as I went, and Resident Evil 6 was on my list. And at first, yeah, it's a fun game to play. The mechanics are fun, the gunplay is incredible, the combat, like the melee combat, is absolutely brilliant, and the mercenaries mode is one of the shining highlights of this game, but unfortunately that does not make the game good within the Resident Evil franchise. I platinumed the game, it took me 150 hours, and do I view it as 150 hours wasted? No, I don't. I don't view it as 150 hours wasted, but I wish I could have done it quicker. Because the platinum for this game takes a lot of replayability and replaying campaigns and stuff like that, and you know, maybe for the first 2 attempts, you know, it's fun, and then it just starts to get irritating and repetitive, and it just bogs you down a little bit. I don't think that RE6 is a bad game. I think it's a bad Resident Evil game, and that is probably because of the high standards set from Resident Evil from the late 1990s and early 2000s. But we can argue that Resident Evil 6 led to a resurgence in form for Resident Evil, but that will be covered later. As for the positives of the game, I think that like I said earlier, I think that the melee combat is very good. I think that the overall combat and gunplay is very refined. I think it's brilliant, and the mercenaries is excellent. But the negatives for me are things such as the story, the writing is kind of sloppy and still has that kind of Resident Evil kind of cheesiness to it, and I don't really like it. There's too much action, pretty much no horror. You could argue that there is a sense of body horror in the game, which I can agree with, but in terms of like survival horror, it's not survival horror. It's not Resident Evil for me, and I think if it wasn't a Resident Evil game, it'd be brilliant. But for me, there is so many negatives outweighing the positives, like the sloppy story, the crappy characters, and the poor writing. Really, it is poorly written when you look at it. An example of that being Ada had no co-op partner when the game first released, and they hot patched Agent into the game, but he couldn't even do anything like open doors or anything like that. And you know, the fundamentals for a survival horror game aren't there. And you know, RE4 and 5 were brilliant. I think that RE4 was great, RE5 was good, but RE6 kind of took that formula too far. And personally, I won't be going back and playing this game. You know, I'm more than happy to do this video essay on it, but I won't be going back and playing the game myself, even if someone asked me to. Also, a good positive is the co-op is fun, but no one wants to play Resident Evil 6 in 2021, so you know, overall, it's a mixed bag for me. You know, playing it when I was a bit older recently, I enjoyed it more than I did when I was younger, but I still don't think it's a viable game, or a good Resident Evil game even. I think overall, for me, it's probably about 4 out of 10. I wouldn't stoop so far to give it a 2 or a 3, but overall, as a Resident Evil game, it is very, very poor. There was a silver lining with Resident Evil 6, though. It made Capcom realise that this isn't what people wanted. The next main series spin-off entry for the franchise was Resident Evil Revelations 2, and that was very different. You know, the first Revelations game was a return to survival horror after games like 4 and 5, and I absolutely loved Revelations to pieces. I played it on the 3DS, I have it on the PS4, I have it on my PS5. You know, it's an absolutely brilliant game, but then RE6 came along and it kind of threw away all that had done. So when Revelations 2 came out and it brought Claire back, absolutely love Claire, favourite character. You know, it kind of brought a bit of revitalization back into the franchise. And then 2 years after that, they released Resident Evil 7, which is my favourite Resident Evil game. Resident Evil 7 for me is an absolute masterpiece, and there will be a video in the pipeline at some point, similar to this one, but about Resident Evil 7. And then after that, obviously, we know came the Resident Evil 2 remake, which is an absolute stellar piece of work, and the Resident Evil 3 remake, which is also fantastic, but is also kind of short and somewhat lacking. And then we have Resident Evil Village coming out on May 7th this year. So, although Resident Evil 6 was really poor and was critically panned as a major departure for the series, it did kind of bring the series back to form later on down the line, which I am thankful for. So, I mean, Resident Evil now is in a really good place in terms of, like, consistency and stuff like that. You know, we've got the TV shows coming, we've got Resident Evil Village and stuff like that. It's all really good right now for Resident Evil. It's a great time to be a fan of this beloved franchise that I love so much. It's my favourite horror franchise. And unfortunately, just RE6 didn't do it for me, really. You know, it just kind of really let me down, and it was just too much of a departure from the franchise for me to enjoy, but it did birth games like Revelations 2, Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, Resident Evil 2 and 3 remake, and then Resident Evil 8, and I cannot thank it enough for that, even though it is absolutely terrible. Here we finally have it at the end of the video, and it is safe to say, unless RE6 pops up for a lore video in the future that I do here on Gamenest, I will not be covering RE6 again. Playing this game for the Platinum was my own choice, and 150 hours later I don't regret it because I've got it out of the way, and I've managed to make a verdict on this game so I won't ever have to play it again, but I don't really want to have to cover it on the channel again. It was an enlightening experience for me, a lot of positives and a lot of negatives, but it made me realise that, like I said before, it birthed some of my favourite games from this franchise. And, you know, the positives are, the combat's great, the melee combat's fantastic, the mercenaries is an absolute blast, and the graphics are amazing, which I forgot to mention earlier, and the co-op is fantastic. But the negatives, the sloppy story writing, the crappy characters, the cheesiness is still there, which was taken away in the likes of RE7, RE2 and 3 remake, and RE8 looks to be pretty serious. But right now it's time to wake from this nightmare and move on. RE8 is just around the corner, as well as stuff like Infinite Darkness, the Resident Evil TV show, the movie, and loads of stuff that is in the pipeline for Resident Evil over the next couple of years up until about 2024 is so exciting. I just want to say a massive thank you to all you guys that have stuck around and watched till the end. I know it's been a bit of a long video, but my main content is going to be Resident Evil on this channel. Obviously, we'll be doing other stuff as well, but you know what? It's good to be back. It's good to be back making videos, especially with two of my best friends. And, you know, I'm looking forward to see what the future holds. I hope you guys stay safe during this strange and unprecedented time of COVID and a global pandemic. But I hope you guys stay safe. You always know where I am. And as for me, Rova, I'm signing off.